And the guy admits in the article, he says, well, it's so much worse. We don't know anything about what's in the Biden papers, but what we do know is that the Trump's is worse, even though we don't know that about Biden. Now, in terms of them using very broad brushstrokes to mean the people that rule our lives, not caring about us, as we said in last week's episode, pay attention to what they do care about versus what they don't. And for that, I'm referring to the topic for the main part of this episode, the recent news story this week, the second week of January, 2023, that Biden, much like his former opponent last August, was found to have classified documents in his possession, which he should not have had. Orange Man was a very bad boy. Well, now has been discovered that Biden is in the exact same boat. Because at first, earlier in the week, which is when I started pulling articles for the show, Biden had something like 10 documents or so in a office in Washington, D.C., which is, I want to say it was like the Penn Biden Center for whatever. It was like a think tank that Biden was trying to set up to work on like foreign policy issues. Because, Biden's the real guru on foreign policy, let me tell you. So anyway, he had 10 or so documents in an office or in a locked office closet. And as you can imagine, despite the fact that this being very eerily similar to what Trump was just raked over the coals for last August 2022, just a few months ago, the Biden apologists came out of the woodworks right away.
They didn't defend it, though.
It wasn't even 24 hours. I was reading articles about this Biden thing is not nearly the same thing as Trump and da-da-da-da-da. And they have all their red herrings to toss out to make sure that you don't focus on the key factor that, as they said during the Trump situation, doesn't matter that he was a former president. He had documents illegally in his possession, which, if they fell into the wrong hands, could cause some serious problems for the United States national security. That's it. Period. Full stop. There was no number of documents that mattered. There was no how did they get there? Did Trump declassify them before he took them, as is his prerogative as president, whereas the vice president doesn't have that prerogative and yet still had documents. But let's not focus too much on that. Let's just focus on, did they have classified documents? Were they not supposed to have those classified documents? And in having them, was a crime committed? That's it. It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 10,001. A crime was committed if those facts are true. And yet the Biden apologists have come out of the woodwork this week to the surprise of precisely nobody.
Come on, Dane. We used to believe in this country that treason was treason. But now we know, because we're so intellectually savvy, that he only committed a little bit of treason. He didn't even block the investigation on him. Granted, he didn't know that there was an investigation because he was too busy watching Sesame Street. But the point is that he only dabbled in treason. Trump was bathing in it. Yeah. He had 320 some odd documents that he shouldn't have had.
Ooh.
Right?
So many. Because everybody knows that the quantity is more important than the quality.
And as we all know, it always trickles down from the top. So, like, the next time you kill somebody, make sure they're a smoker. Okay? So he was killing himself. He was already smoking. He enjoyed a cigarette. He was going to get lung cancer. He was definitely compromising his lungs. I didn't commit murder. I accelerated lung cancer. Not guilty.
Well, and here's the thing that infuriates me so much about that point in particular of saying, well, Biden's was only 10 and Trump's, but the story developed throughout the week, which we'll get to in a second. But just focusing on that early in the week kind of excuse making is, well, Biden only had 10 and Trump had hundreds, whatever. if you'll recall, at the time that the Trump situation happened, there was a lot of speculation going around before anybody knew anything. And we're going to get to also people not knowing things here in a second. There was a lot of speculation going around that, oh, I bet in those Trump documents, there's probably like launch codes and like nukes are going to start going off at any time, right? You remember all that speculation? Well, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I don't know how long a string of letters and numbers a launch code needs to be. I'm pretty sure you could probably fit multiple launch codes on a single piece of paper. So when they were speculating about that, about what was in Trump's documents, don't you think that if that was actually turned out to be true and that was in the documents that Trump had, that we would have heard about that, which probably suggests to you that maybe it wasn't? And yet before anybody knew anything about what was in the only 10 from Biden, well, what if, again, speculate for Trump, speculate for Biden, if you're being an unbiased news source, what if only one of those 10 papers has exactly that thing that was going to be the worst thing that Trump could have possibly possessed? It would have been possible. It would have been possible at the time that this Washington Post article entitled, oh shit, it's behind a paywall. I can't see the title. Well, I saw it at one point in time. But at the time that the Washington Post published this article about the Trump document situation is so much worse than Biden, right? And the guy admits in the article, he says, well, it's so much worse. We don't know anything about what's in the Biden papers. But what we do know is that the Trump's is worse, even though we don't know that about Biden. It's odd how that works, right? But, you know, in these people's minds, that makes a whole lot of sense. So I just, you know, that's the whole thing that drives me the most insane about just focusing on the number of 10 versus 300. You can fit a lot of nuclear launch codes on one piece of paper, let alone 10.
Here's the thing, that these same places, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, they all tout themselves as the real news. If you were the real news, you would be all over Biden. Right now. Right now, you'd be lighting Biden up. You'd be saying the vaccines are shit, they're causing myocarditis, and that Biden did the same thing as Trump. We shouldn't reelect him. We want justice now. Go ahead, Dane. You seem to have things to say about this.
No. So what I was getting ready to say is, yeah, it's really sad that going to those mainstream articles or in those mainstream publications that you can't get anything remotely resembling unbiased truth and just general basic principles of honest journalism. And you got to come to independent media sources like this. This is the reason why Joe Rogan is the biggest media platform on the planet, is because if nothing else, they know he's not trying to feed them a line of bullshit. It's his opinion, which they may agree or disagree with, but they know they're getting the honest, unvarnished Joe that is going to do his best, as all biased humans are, do his best to play it as level as he possibly can. And that's what we're trying to do here as well.
And you want to know why? Because his monetary gain is that you trust him. Their monetary gain is who's paying them for their advertising. Straight up. That's why their system is failing. That's why they attacked him so much, is that these independent, and it's not just Joe, obviously. It's is it The Hill or no? Is the Breaking Points with Sagar and Crystal or Kristen? It's Tim Pool's podcast. It's like, it's going to Substack.
I was going to say
Taibbi.
The Hill is still.
It's like, well, it. You have your opinion of it.
It's still mainstream mouthpiece stuff.
But it's still an independent thing.
It's not Joe and Tim and us and stuff like that. Right. It's not brand.
Understood, but it's still, they're doing their own thing. Like it's not fucking Don Lemon saying that all white people are racist at 6 p.m. on a fucking Wednesday night.
To be fair, few people are Don Lemon, thank God. They all have their own little flavor of bullshit.
He's trying to stand back up with the women's soccer team versus the men's, but
I did see that.
I digress. Anywho, Back to you.
But anyway, this article, this Washington Post, which again, I'm still going to link to a hoping it because it wasn't behind a paywall
it was behind
before.
a paywall for me earlier, so
it is now. But anyway, so
maybe they don't want you to figure out.
the guy spends precisely zero time discussing the Biden documents. He just spends 3/4 of the article rehashing everything that they said last August about Trump as if we all have the memory of a goldfish and forgot. And then the funniest part about the whole thing, in addition to saying we don't know anything about the Biden documents, but we know it's not as bad as Trump's, is he has a funny little admission in there where he says at the end, he says, quote, "There was no effort by Biden to argue publicly that he had given the government everything it wanted, even though he hadn't. In fact, there's no indication the government was even looking for these documents in the first place." End quote. Well, you just gave up the whole game, buddy. The fact that they're not looking at him is the whole game. They don't look at the ones that are doing their bidding for them. And an interesting little caveat, little theory on that here in a second. Like, that's the whole thing. That doesn't show that you're unbiased and objective by saying, well, the government wasn't looking at him. No fucking shit, Sherlock. The government hasn't been looking at him or his family for decades, despite the fact that they should have been. Remember his son's laptop in the 2020 election? Or how about just even this instance? I just found out today, after a week of reporting, do you know when these first sets of documents were actually discovered, the ones that were in his office in the locked closet? Where did I write it? I wrote it down here somewhere. On November 2nd, 2022.
I remembered that from the fucking pre-roll.
If you're doing the quick maths.
Would you try to be professional?
I'm sorry. That is 6 days before the midterm elections. Now, if you remember, his son's laptop story was also suppressed before the 2020 election because that might have an impact on those elections. And it's still
suppressed to this day.
And
it's still suppressed.
Independent media source covered for you before these midterms about how Biden was colluding with a foreign power in Saudi Arabia, trying to get them to turn the oil pumps back on so that he could lower gas prices and influence the midterms in that way. And then they also apparently suppressed this, or at least refused to talk about it until after these past midterms. And I'm supposed to expect from all of that non-looking at Biden that means that he's not doing anything wrong? That even if he does do something wrong, it's not as bad as Orange Man bad? I mean, again, you don't have to become a Trump apologist to point out the fact that this is an equally bad thing that they did. And that if you're going to lynch somebody for doing it, you got to do the same thing to the other guy. Well, that's all we're saying.
Here, Dane.
Call the balls and strikes fairly. That's it.
I posit to you, and this might be where we should end this episode, is like, where does this go? It doesn't lead back to there being two very worthy candidates, does it? Because how are you going to get how is everybody going to pay attention to these media cycles anymore when we get two 50-year-old relatively idealistic, relatively centered politicians running for this office known as presidency? Where do these stories come from then? The people that haven't been in the game for fucking 40 years before they run for goddamn office, and they have every amount of blackmail on them. People that can actually formulate a sentence without it having to be written and then rewritten and then bold and then put it into the colors that they prefer on the teleprompter for them to get it right. Like, when do we go back to a president being a president? And I mean, from what I'm seeing here, and I don't want to be the cynic here, but like, it almost makes more sense for them, for the media, for the whole aperture of what is identified as Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill and all that good stuff. It almost makes more sense to put more rickety, senile, bought and paid for politicians there, so that the other side can always point out the things that they're doing and say, no, 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 how dare you? And then vice versa, the other side points out all the things the other side is doing, go, no, 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 how dare you? You're evil. But then the same mechanism keeps working the same way it has been since it's been selling off our rights and privileges and all of our hard work and fiscal earnings since 1939, roughly? Was that the dawn of the military industrial complex, or was it after that?
After that, I mean, Ike warned about it when he was leaving office in, what was that, 60? So 59 or 60.
And then Roosevelt.
Yeah, and then Kennedy was shot over.
And then, no. Reagan. Reagan was talking about it in his speech when he was leaving office. So it's there. Every time they're leaving, they're like, hey, there's some shit going on, Doc. And how long, I mean, what is the cost, to steal another Batman quote, what is the cost for your blind eye? Like, how long are you just going to go, I just don't have time for that. I got to raise my kids. I got to do that. Well, you're raising your kid to go into it's not a utopia. You're raising your kid to go into the world that you set for him. You're striving for a world that doesn't exist right now. Because if this keeps going this direction, you're burning the candle at both ends at this point. You're not even adhering to sense. Go back to Culture Corner and the meme destruction and Epstein. There was no logic within any of those things that we purposefully destroyed on this. And then you go to Biden, and they can't even call a strike for the other team. Oh, he just did treason a little bit. We can forgive him for that. He's been in fucking DC since when? 1980 something? 5? 7?
Before that, 70s.
He was in the 70s? He's been there for fucking ages. You don't think this dumb motherfucker has directed where this country is going? And has made huge amounts of profits and isn't bought and paid for by everybody that's in DC? Jesus Christ, if you truly think that, then I guess make sure your homework's done and drink your warm glass of milk, because you got to wake up at 7:30 tomorrow to go back to second grade. I don't know what to tell you. If you truly are that naive, then I hope Santa brought you something wonderful for Christmas, and the Easter Bunny's right around the corner. So don't hold out. Other than that, for all the people that don't understand what I'm saying, that know that all those things aren't real, this is reality. This is how it works.
Well, unfortunately for those who wrote articles like the Washington Post when the story originally broke on January 10th, just a couple days later, on January 12th, yesterday, we learned that there were more classified documents found in more places, this time not a locked cabinet in his office, but in his garage next to his Corvette.
He meant to put it there. He just forgot that he was carrying it and set it down.
And at his house in Delaware. And, he was indignant when he was questioned by Peter Doocy from Fox about, what were you thinking? Why were these documents just in a box next to your Corvette in your garage? And he's like, well, my garage is locked, Peter. There's not like they're out there in the street, something to that effect, because, when your hand's caught in the cookie jar, I guess get incensed, get answer with righteous indignation, which you have no right to. But
oh my God.
Again, the macro of the whole thing is obviously the media bias, which again, it's beating a dead horse at this point. Everybody knows about the media bias, and it is what it is. And that's why independent media like yours truly are growing, and we appreciate your efforts to help us grow. But to just tie this little baby up with a potential conspiracy theory, right? Because we're already lumped into that camp as far as the thought and speech controllers would probably tell you about us, is let's just throw a little red meat out there and see what happens. I'm of the mind that, well, why are his handlers that have been running cover for him basically since he was VP to get him to this point, why are they not continuing to cover up this stuff now? And I think it is because he's made clear over the past couple months when people ask him, are you going to run in 24? And he's made clear that he has every intention to. And what I think is that the shot callers in his party don't want him to, and they're not going to let him. So when he says, I'm running, and they say, you ain't running, they have every incentive to just not to do as one Democratic representative said that, these were probably planted, which again, convenient. Nobody had that argument for Trump, but excuses for Biden, but not saying that the controllers in the Democratic Party would necessarily plant it. I'm not saying that they would be above that, but just to say that if they knew about this information since before the midterms and didn't let it out when they needed enough Democrats to win so there wasn't a red wave, why let it out now? Well, because they want to torpedo him and make sure that he doesn't get in for 24 because they have other people in mind.